Okay, guys, today we are here with Jarry Xiao, who is the other side of Ellipsis Labs. I've had Eugene on a couple times now. I should start by saying that they sponsored this podcast. I'm also an investor in Ellipsis. This is one of the teams that I think is up there amongst the smartest and really some of the guys who I think are brilliant and pushing the edge. And I'm not paid to say that part, so just some clarification there. So today we have on Jarry, who, like I said, is the co-founder of Ellipsis Labs, good friend and incredibly bright. Jarry, if you want to introduce yourself for a second, we could jump in.
Hey, thanks for the intro. I'm Jarry. As mentioned, one of the co-founders of Ellipsis Labs. I run the engineering team here. Did a lot of development on Phoenix. Prior to starting Ellipsis, I was at Solana Labs, worked as an engineer there, and even before that, I was in TradFi.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back a little bit to your TradFi experience. I know you had a short but illustrious career, and I say illustrious only because I know that you were an experienced trader right out of college. What were you doing in TradFi, like right out of college?
Yeah, I joined Citadel out of college. I joined as a software engineer, so I did most of my work there, kind of working on the infrastructure side. Working a little bit with like packet data from exchanges, doing some like data pipeline stuff. Ultimately, I was a little less interested in doing like some of this like back end work and wanted to get a little bit closer to like day-to-day trading operations. So I left to join a smaller options market making firm. There, I got to get a little bit like at least day-to-day trading operations. Got to get closer to the action there. Still doing a lot of software, still doing a lot of infra, but also worked on things like the pricing model and some of the trading strategy implementation.
Yeah, what were you trading there? Just out of curiosity. I know I had Ren on, right? But we didn't talk about anything. So I do like to probe a little bit with traders. What were you trading there?
Yeah, so we're doing like ag options on the CME. So these are like products like cattle, hogs, soybeans, corn, wheat. So it really just awesome. Like trading the agriculture suite. It was really interesting. I think like a lot of the philosophy that I have around trading comes from my time at that firm. Kind of just thinking about what really drives the flows in these markets. Where do we have edge? And like really, I think that like out of college, a lot of people have this, or a lot of people going into trading have this like this view of the world where you can like solve the markets with these like fancy algorithms or like doing these like really sick math problems. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the fact that like there are like flows that are coming into each of these markets, and the edge is coming from somewhere. And if you have a way to model the way that market works and like who the major players are, how the underlying mechanics of the market work, that's sort of how you really like get an edge in these different situations. I think that like this experience helped me a lot going from TradFi into crypto too, because a lot of the learnings that I basically learned by being in traditional finance, I was able to apply to a lot of the stuff I see in crypto. And a lot of the things that I think it took the crypto industry a long time to figure out were pretty intuitive after just like working in finance for only a few years out of college.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we'll like definitely dig in a little bit more later on to that. Okay, let's start with Phoenix. You guys launched a central limit order book on Solana. It was, well, I think it was like by far the most successful order book. Yeah, like we can start there. When did you guys start building that? And like what was the kind of the vision there?
Yeah, so we started building Phoenix in like late 2022. At the time, I just left my job at Solana Labs, where I mean, that was my first foray into crypto, working at Solana. It was a pretty eye-opening experience in some ways because I didn't really know anything about smart contracts at the time or like what they could do. And the reason why we built Phoenix in the first place is Phoenix is close to, or it's like more similar to what you'd find in like a traditional exchange than a lot of the stuff that was like in crypto at the time. Most of the markets on chain were like some form of like an XY equals K AMM, either like a UniV2 fork or a UniV3 fork. And I think both Eugene and I had this like the suspicion that this was not the right way to do like spot markets on a chain that moves like faster than one block every 12 seconds.
Yeah.
And a lot of that does come from this like TradFi intuition of like when you work on like actual market making systems in the real world, you really care about reacting to like price updates or like trade information. Like every piece of information tells you a little bit about how the price changes. And when the price does change, and you're actually on the hook for like filling the other side of the order, you want to make sure you can move your quotes out of the way. Right. And the AMM model fundamentally sort of rejects this premise and says, instead of like moving my quotes automatically, I'm going to have people trade into me, which feels kind of wrong. Like if I know the price is higher than like my resting offer, I really don't want to sell for under the fair market price, which is what like AMMs end up doing. The order book model is, at the very least, it allows you to this optionality to like move your quotes away when the price is actually moving in that direction. And so because Solana moves so much faster than like a chain like Ethereum, you can support these market primitives that look a little bit closer to what you have in traditional finance. The idea with Phoenix is that like we saw this order book on Solana that was around for about like 2 years. This is Serum. And we were just kind of surprised that this never like really took off, or like it didn't really live up to its potential in a lot of ways. We can go into like some of the reasons why, but I think the main thing is that like there was no active development team working on this product, and you have this like 2-year-old tech debt that is like never going to get cleaned up. And I think our idea is that like, okay, like this tech is not that hard to build. I think that you can like find like a talented college sophomore in a CS program and they can like build an order book. It's not that complicated. However, like you need someone to actually sit down, think about the problem, write the code, and like actually have the agency to ship it. And that's kind of what we did. We just felt like this was something that was needed, because if you don't have active liquidity in the ecosystem, you really can't be competitive with traditional finance. Like that's kind of like the baseline for like the markets being existing in the first place. I can go more into that in a bit too.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe I want to ask a little bit about like Phoenix. Phoenix did a lot of volume, right? But I think that maybe a lot of people don't know that a lot of their orders ended up being routed through Phoenix, right? So did you guys like what was the idea there in the sense that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, of course Phoenix has a front end, but it seemed like a lot of the trading was going through aggregators. Is that like directionally correct?
Yeah. That's definitely correct. I think one like tricky problem, and this kind of goes back to like why should a market even exist in the first place? Well, I think like basically the whole point of a market is you have participants who have like differing preferences and like demand. Like they either want to like buy a token or sell a token, or buy stock or sell stock, and they're like mismatched in time. And so you need some way to basically take these people who have like opposing like price preferences and like make sure that they can actually trade together. And the market maker is this like glue that holds it together, right? You kind of just like, you have some natural buyers and you have some natural sellers. They're not, they're disjointed in time somewhere. And the market maker is this like individual like counterparty that like allows them to sort of like meet in the middle somewhere. And ultimately, like the way it works is that like you have these market participants, like the traders, like the takers, who are relatively demand inelastic. Like they really just want to make their trade. Like I see Bitcoin and I want to buy Bitcoin. Do I really care what price I get it at? Like maybe a little bit. Like I see the price on the screen. If I'm off by like 0.5%, like I don't really care that much. Right. I think most retail traders have this preference, and like that's actually like really inelastic from the perspective of like someone who's like real time quoting this thing, because you have a really accurate representation of what the fair price of this asset should be. And because of this like price inelasticity, like you as a market, like if you are a market maker and you're sort of like providing liquidity to these retail traders, you should be able to like on average scalp a little bit of edge from every trade that they make.
For sure.
Yeah. And so like basically the idea behind like this Phoenix thing is that like if you have these people, like you need to basically have some source of demand and some source of supply. And I'm going to go back to your question, which is like where the orders come from. From our perspective, like because of the way Solana worked, most of this like demand flow came from Jupiter, which is an aggregator. Right. And so like when you want to bootstrap an exchange and like bootstrap a market, and you want to make this like two-sided, like you solve this like two-sided demand problem, both the suppliers and the consumers being the traders and suppliers being the market makers. Really, if you integrate yourself into this like source of flow, which is Jupiter, you kind of solve one problem for free, where like you don't actually really have to worry about like the demand coming in. Like when we started, the demand for trading on Solana was like probably like, I would guess like 50 to 100 times lower than it is today. Like it was a pretty bleak time. FTX just crashed. Like Sol price was like under $20. I think that like people thought we were kind of crazy for like continuing to build on Solana at the time, but like it was one of the few chains that had the properties that we needed to support like a real order book. And also like there was this natural like supply chain where if there were any retail traders whatsoever, they were most likely going through this aggregator. And so one really hard problem of any marketplace is like, how do you bootstrap demand? We we didn't really need to solve that problem because once we integrated into Jupiter, we got that demand for free. And really our main problem, which is like, I think the generally easier problem, is how do you bootstrap the supply?
Right. Okay. Before we go into sort of the next phase of Ellipsis, which is Atlas, and we're going to talk a lot about that, but like, I want to ask first, fundamentally you built what I think, of course I'm biased, what I think was kind of the canon, maybe people don't know exactly what that means, but like the optimal order book, but it's still on a blockchain. Okay. Right. Like fundamentally you are still dealing with a permissionless validator set. What were, and again, we're going to jump into the Atlas conversation, but like what were some of the problems that you encountered, if you encountered them, building on this, open validator set blockchain, fundamentally a blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, like no matter what, even if the blockchain moves fast, you're still not moving as fast as Binance is moving. You're certainly not moving as fast as the NASDAQ is moving. A 400 millisecond per block is for a human, like you can still kind of notice it. Where like normal humans, like if I told you something was like 100 milliseconds or like 50 milliseconds, we probably wouldn't notice the difference. Like it doesn't matter. It's like a blip to us. Like 400 milliseconds is like half a second. Like it's enough for you to like feel something. And then obviously in addition to the 400 milliseconds, you have this like additional network latency when you're like interacting with the front end. And so like it's like very evident if you're like clicking along that you're using the blockchain. Like this is even as a human, that you're using the blockchain. If you're a bot, that also has like implications with respect to like price movements, right? Like I think if you're like quoting on Phoenix and that the block is moving once every 400 milliseconds, and like the Binance price is like ticking on like a millisecond or sub-millisecond basis, the price can move quite a lot in 400 milliseconds. Like quite a lot is like relative. Like if you're quoting like say your quotes are 2 basis points wide on each side, and the price moves by like 10 bips on Binance, that's enough for your quotes to be stale. Like you're tight enough so that the price movement off chain is enough for you to like want to like cancel your quotes. And fundamentally, whenever this happens, you have this like race where I know that my price is wrong. Like I know that I'm offsides, and everyone else in the world who's also sophisticated and listening to the same price feed also knows that I'm offsides. And so people are going to try to take out my order. I'm going to try to cancel my order. And it's like a 1 versus like 100 race. And realistically, just like the law of probability tells you, you're just not going to win that. Like you're like on average, you're just going to lose because there's more people who are trying to take out your order than you are like trying to cancel it. And I think that, I mean, that's not a problem. That's a problem that exists everywhere. It's like not unique to blockchains. But on blockchains in particular, like it's just more, it's going to happen more often. And like the more often it happens, the wider you have to quote ultimately.
How did market makers sort of guarantee inclusion? Like what was their strategy in terms of, like you were talking about, they could be offsides and they're racing against all of these other people trying to include transactions in, again, open validator set, right? So like how did, like what was the strategy there for, I'm kind of curious because I've talked to a bunch of people with AM who've worked on AMMs, right? It's like totally different conversation. I'm a little bit more interested now in like with this order book design, how are they able to kind of market make there?
Yeah, so one of the first feature requests we got for Phoenix was from like our original market maker. When we launched it, we didn't have this feature, but we built it in after after we like officially went to mainnet. And this is like it's like time enforced orders. Basically, like once you place a limit order on the book, you set a little expiration date and say like if someone tries to fill this order after some point in time, either like a slot on Solana or like Solana has like a timestamp oracle that sort of estimates what the real world time is. If the order gets like aggressed on after that point in time, it's like essentially is nullified. Basically, it's like a lazy cancel. And so this is like one example of like how you can protect yourself. Where if you're quoting on Phoenix, you can actually say that like I will not fill any orders if someone tries to like hit this bid or hit this quote, hit this offer after like 5 seconds. Like you can set that explicit like expiration date, and that protects you a little bit. Obviously, it's not like going to protect you in every single case, but like in the case that you can't actually get your quotes on chain in time, this is like a protection. Another thing you alluded to is like, how do you actually like place orders on chain? I think that's another thing that we noticed with Solana that was like quite difficult and like a little bit unintuitive. We kind of had this idea, or at least I had this sense that like landing transactions on Solana mainnet was pretty tough in 2021, 2022 when I was working at Solana Labs. I think it really escalated when like the chain activity started like skyrocketing, where like landing on chain just becomes this like extremely tough endeavor. The highlight of this for me was like OR. I don't know if you remember OR from like last year. Yeah, that was a really fun
New
time.
Bitcoin.
New Bitcoin on Solana. You proof of work hash on your MacBook Pro, and you like send it to the chain. It turns out the bottleneck to this problem is not solving the hash problem. It's like sending your transaction to the blockchain, which I thought was hilarious.
It is.
Yeah. It's hilarious because like I can mine these hashes on my MacBook, but I couldn't land a transaction on the blockchain because it was so congested. But imagine that like this is like, or is like a little fun game that you can play, fun game to make your magic internet money. But like when you're quoting like on an order book, like this is like a financial service. You really care about making sure you can land your quote. And like this congestion is like pretty unacceptable. Like it makes everything that I mentioned before about this like adverse selection between makers and takers even worse. Because one of the reasons why order books are nice is because this cancellation operation like allows you to dodge these cases where you're like going to get screwed. But if it is harder to cancel because the chain is congested, that makes it even harder for you to like try to land your quotes. And that like makes toxicity even worse in the cases where like the price is moving really hard. And so, yeah, like that's another challenge that like building on a blockchain poses is specifically like if it turns out that like landing your transaction to do a place or a cancel is particularly challenging, that makes this quoting operation far harder. And it makes it like much more difficult for the market maker to be profitable doing this.
That makes sense. Okay, well, then let's move a little bit on now to Atlas. Tell us about Atlas. What is the idea behind your upcoming? Hang on, I don't want to say it wrong. Not L2. Roll up. What? Yeah, go ahead.
So I mean, I think you can call it L2 or roll up. Like all these like crypto buzzwords are.
Yeah, I know.
mean, they all mean the same. They're all like the same thing. I think none of it really matters. Ultimately, it's like Atlas is infrastructure, and I think infrastructure is really, really boring. Like infrastructure shouldn't matter. It's like, why do you care what the backend software looks like when you're using some application? I think that like usually as a user you don't care. But when you're trading, like this kind of stuff matters a little bit. Like if I'm trading on an exchange, I kind of want to know how the matching engine works. I kind of want to know like what are the gotchas when I try to like send my order to like place a base bid or like cancel my order. Like all these things matter a little bit. And like what Atlas is fundamentally trying to do is like, how can you build like a blockchain that allows you to do these financial operations in a way that's like as minimally cumbersome as possible. So I think backing up a little bit, like centralized exchanges have a really great interface for like a trader. Like it's actually just so nice. There's a reason why like these like we'll call them like pseudo centralized or like semi-decentralized systems made it big in the last couple of years. Like Hyperliquid succeeded largely because the UX is like extremely solid. Like it's a really well-built product. And I think like the centralized aspects of that system like contribute to that for sure. Like people use FTX. FTX was like the code was probably not very good. I think I've heard a lot of people sort of like hint at the fact that they wrote their matching engine in Python, which I mean, as like an engineer, that feels kind of crazy to me, like why you would do that. But like as a product, it worked fine. And like it's like totally okay. And like largely due to the fact that it has like predictable behavior. I think centralized exchanges generally have like generally predictable behavior. You can obviously mess up the implementation, but there are pieces of that system that like make a lot of sense. What crypto is good at is I think like really just like a few things. One is that it like unifies the asset ledger, which I think is quite useful. Where if you have like transactions that touch multiple different markets, you actually can just like unify that entire set without this like complex reconciliation problem. The other is like this general protocol around like asset transfer and asset movement. It's like standardized, and that's like quite nice to work with. And like, these are things that you can't really get for free, where like, in the fintech world, in the TradFi world, you have these companies that basically just like try to reconcile these different DBs together. And like, turns out that in crypto, the way that you reconcile the DBs is you just like transfer the token and like you read the ledger directly. That I think is like the primary benefit of these systems. And like Atlas is just trying to merge a bunch of the things that are good about both sides, where like you have this like unified protocol, you have this unified ledger, but you also have like the ability to build like what feels like a centralized exchange experience without losing the good properties of crypto. Mainly, like you have this like asset ledger, you have this like cryptographic verification of every operation that's being made by a user. Like you have to sign every trade, for example. I think it's like a pretty reasonable thing to do. Like your state transition is like truly verifiable. The goal behind it is like, can you build like good financial products using some of the baseline infrastructure that we got from crypto?
Yeah, okay, but let me ask you this, and I'm not trying to polarize Atlas from like your work with Solana, obviously, but did you basically feel that the infrastructure that you wanted to build wasn't possible to build on Solana? Like, was it an intractable problem in the sense, like some of the things we discussed before, right? With, how matching works on order books, and maybe you built what is, like the theoretically optimal order book for something that runs on an open permissionless, blockchain. But I'm curious, like, did you feel that the direction you had to go was, okay, we can't build something like this on Solana? Or is that like too demonizing?
That's a good question. I think like one of the reasons why it's difficult to build something like this on like using Solana's infrastructure is that like Solana is actually like, I'd say like it's a pretty mature network. There's a lot of like fairly involved like stakeholders that care a lot about the future of the chain and how it evolves. And a lot of our decisions, or like a lot of things we want to do with Atlas, are like pretty opinionated, and like really like there's this difference between like credible neutrality and like efficiency in a sense, where like Solana is trying to be credibly neutral. Or at least my understanding of the Solana chain is that it is attempting to be like somewhat credibly neutral for like what kind of data it like runs on, what kind of applications it supports. Ethereum is like pretty well known to be like credibly neutral, right? Like it doesn't want to take sides. It doesn't want to like prioritize one type of transaction over another type of transaction. I think that like one thing that I sense is that it'd be really hard to sort of push through like, hey, like Solana, this credibly neutral blockchain, should focus on these things that are like highly opinionated. This sort of seems as odds to me, where like for example, like we want to prioritize maker cancels and want to prioritize like Oracle updates, like ways to get prices of the chain as fast as possible. You can probably do this with Solana, but I don't know how easy it would be to sort of push this through from like a like getting this like change through the network, because you have to go through all these stakeholders. And I think like partially that has to do with the fact that the Solana is a pretty mature network. Like to have all these stakeholders, you have to like there's like a real economy here, and you don't really want to mess with the status quo too much, because like this could affect people's livelihood, it could affect people's businesses, and like there's a huge amount of effort, like a huge amount of political capital you have to spend to get through like a change like that. With Atlas, I think that like basically the idea is, okay, like we think this is the right way to structure the backend infrastructure. Like we think it makes sense to be opinionated. And if you can kind of cut all this red tape, then you can actually implement this change without much pushback. I think that's like one of the major reasons why we're like choosing to build this like as our own standalone chain. And then like Solana as this like base layer VM, I think to me, I think it doesn't really matter too much. Like the VM choice of a chain is like relatively unimportant, but we as a team are quite familiar with it. Like me being someone who worked at Ellipsis Labs and also like built a number of contracts using the SVM, like pretty familiar with the way that system works. I think it's like relatively well designed. Like I think there are things that are clearly not perfect about it, but I'm not like a perfectionist developer. Like I think ultimately like code just needs to work for the most part. And then interfaces are like these things that like, oh, you can have opinions about them, but like once they're kind of locked in stone, like you really just don't want to change them, because once you change like one little interface, the entire dominoes just start falling. Like you have this chain of things just start breaking, and there's just like a huge pain in the ass to deal with. So like I think I'm down to take the easy win and like try to like keep the things that kind of work, change the things that we're allowed to change now that we've like given up this credible neutrality thing, and really try to like optimize the infrastructure for like the types of applications we are looking for.
Yeah. Do you feel, again, not to try to put you in a corner here, but do you feel that this, what you're doing, maybe your personal opinion, is somewhat of a rejection of the NASDAQ on-chain premise, like we're going to be able to have these hotspots around the world that, because they're closer co-located to signal or information coming from markets. I'm not trying to like put you in a corner here, but this is one of the selling points, the narratives of Solana. And, we got Max Stresnick working on this now. Tolly's obviously a huge advocate of this premise. I'm curious if, you coming from TradFi, if this is at all sort of a rejection of that premise, and you think that, that in the long run, it most likely does not look like that.
It's kind of just like a counter approach. I think it's possible that this premise works where you like have this MCP thing where the signal originates from, say, like Singapore, and then you send it to a node in Singapore, and suddenly like the network reaches global consensus because like information is able to like sort of propagate like asynchronously. I think it's a pretty interesting idea. I think it's very complex. Like I think it's a very, very hard problem. And I think what we're doing is like actually much easier and from like a pure implementation standpoint. And I think you accomplish similar goals. Because like ultimately what you actually want is like you want the market to be like efficient enough, and you want like, or I think actually one thing that's like really nice about crypto is you have this ability to innovate on the market design, and like being able to like change the way that like you do matching, for example, or change the way that you like design the underlying way that like people interact with the chain or interact with the exchange. Really like control of your own assets is like I think one of the biggest innovations that crypto gave you or gave people in general. And yeah, I mean, I think like both of these approaches, like centralized but verifiable sequencer versus like distributed MCP network, both of them have like similar goals in mind. It's just like a different implementation. And I don't really feel like one is like necessarily going to win over the other. We are choosing one. We're choosing the centralized sequencer like view of the world. But I think that like largely it's like easier solution from like a like engineering perspective. Whereas this other one is like a huge endeavor. It's like a very big investment. It has some chance of working, but like there's also these like relatively unknown properties that like we don't understand until they hit production. Like I think like a lot of this like theoretical stuff is like, I mean, it's cool. And like, I think people can like argue about it. It's like fun to argue about because no one knows the right answer. And the thing that you actually need to do is ship it and see like what the market reacts to. And like, given the cost to ship, I think like, I'm really happy to see these experiments be run. I don't really want to do that extra work on our end. Like we have a business to run here. And like, we should just choose the solution that like, we're pretty confident works with like the appropriate amount of engineering effort.
Yeah. Okay. So then to that end, you talked about like a single sequencer, but verifiable. Like what are some of the unlocks that you see? I mean, to the extent that you could talk about them yet, I know it's still in production. I know you guys are taking your time. But in terms of like, what do you see as the big unlocks with Atlas? So that would be the first one I would probably ask about, right? Like a single sequencer, but verifiable, right? You've taken this sort of opinionated approach. Like anything else you want to throw in there as well. I'm interested to hear kind of like your design ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some stuff around like just general developer experience in crypto. Like, I think the main innovation is like not unique to Atlas. It's kind of just like unique to just blockchains in general or like programmable blockchains. Is the fact that you can like program the asset ledger. I think that's like a really sick thing. Like, I think that's the thing that like I think I made a tweet pretty recently saying that like crypto is this like universal API for money. Yeah. And I think that's like actually the thing that sold me on the industry altogether over anything else. It's like. You can now like program like these applications that can like talk to each other using this like same infrastructure without the nasty wires of like fintech. Right. I think that's a really nice feature, and like being able to program this asset ledger, I think it's ultimately the innovation not only of Atlas but of crypto in general. And like what Atlas is going to do is like ideally we make this like process of programming the asset ledger a little bit easier. Solana is like famous for having like pretty bad developer experience. I think largely due to the fact that like when they launched it, they didn't really think too much about this problem. But a really like standard one is like, how do I even like read the data from the chain? Like I think everyone talks about Solana having like really bad block explorer. Like the joke is no one knows how to read a Solana block explorer. I think that will be true for some time because like it's actually just like really difficult to parse through that information. And a big piece of why it's hard to like build a good Solana block explorer is because reading the data from the chain is like so difficult to do. And it doesn't have to be this way. I think like it's very reasonable to imagine that like in addition to like modifying the blockchain, like when you make a transaction and like move assets or tokens around, detecting that event and like building a historical sequence of things that happen on chain should be easy. Like when you say the chain is verifiable or when you say the blockchain is verifiable, like ultimately it comes with this asterisks, which is like, oh, it's verifiable, but it's like really freaking hard to do because like verifying this chain requires you to run this like very custom piece of software and this very, very bespoke data format that you have to work with. And as like an application developer, it's like really difficult to reconcile that. I think one thing that we're trying to do on the Atlas side is like for one thing, like reading data is like a solved engineering problem. It's been solved for decades. It's like actually just not that hard. Ultimately, like writing data is the thing that's kind of hard. Is like you can only really write data to like one machine at a time. Like you're bottlenecked by like I can only like write one operation at a time on like one particular machine. Read, you can like copy things as much as you want. Like you can have like a million replicas of this like object somewhere and like you can just like serve it to users. It's like no problem at all. And so really like this read problem should not be that hard. It's like clearly a solved problem. The difficult thing here is like, what is the protocol that you're like exposing to your users for how to like transmit data? And like, if I'm a user, like a developer, and I'm getting this like string of opaque bytes from the server, I can't really do much with it. Like I need to understand how to like deal with that information. And ultimately, like this is just like a communication problem, right? Like I'm on an interview right now. I kind of like to think about like server client architecture as like an interviewee and like an interviewer, like someone asking questions, someone like providing answers. Yeah. And ultimately, like what it kind of looks like is that like if you're like asking the questions be like relatively precise, and then as the person who's like answering those questions, you should be able to like provide relatively clean responses. And like when you design APIs, it should look like this too, where like I'm an API consumer and I want to like read the chain. I should be able to tell like the server who's the person who's like answering my question, like what data I want to get back. And then the server, who is kind of like the person responding to the interviewer, should be able to construct like the right set of responses so that the person asking the question is able to like work with it properly. So one thing that we're doing with Atlas is basically redefining the way that this like client server interface looks with this thing called RPCX. Roughly what that looks like is basically when you ask a question to the server, you provide it like this additional information to like transform your data into something that's like you can actually use. Like there's this like missing piece in the Solana API where you can't actually like figure out how to decode the data server side. And then ultimately, like this is kind of where it should be done, where like if someone gives you a really crappy response, like in Solana land, it's your job to sort of interpret that crappy response into something that you can use properly. But what you actually would prefer to do is like ask the question and get like the exact information you need. And then like the communication is like much more concise and much more, it's much more high bandwidth because you can like use the information immediately after you like ask the question.
The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs, who I've been following for 3 years now. They're one of the strongest teams I know in crypto. Ellipsis Labs is a small engineering team with a flat structure. They build complex systems, primarily in Rust. For engineers who like challenges, here's the kind of problem they solve. A layer 2 blockchain needs to maintain 100 million accounts and generate a state root after each transaction batch. The root must be built within 50 milliseconds. How would you design a system to ensure the root construction is fast enough? High-performance challenges are core to Ellipsis Labs' mission as they build modern crypto finance. They believe finance needs more than an upgrade. It needs a complete rewrite. The success of their first product, Phoenix V1, speaks for itself, doing over $70 billion in organic trading volume. Now, Ellipsis Labs is building Atlas, the blockchain purpose-built for verifiable finance. I know this team personally, and I like them because they're unique in the crypto space. They have a long-term focus, they work in person from their New York City headquarters, and they're here to build products that fundamentally change the world of finance. If you want to learn more about their open roles, go to ellipsislabs.xyz/careers. When you say purpose-built, right? Like this is one of the buzzwords you guys, I shouldn't say buzzwords, but this is one of the words you guys have been using, right? Purpose-built. what does that mean in the context of, okay, you built Phoenix, it was central limit order book on chain. You're now, beginning to, launch Atlas. I'm curious, when you say purpose built, does this mean purpose built for a central limit order book? Does this mean purpose built for a variety of applications? What does that mean, like in your mind, at least?
I think purpose built for financial applications. Like ultimately, I think cryptos or like blockchains are good for like only a few things. It's like asset transfer, asset origination, exchange, yield. Like those are the primary like features of like financial applications. A lot of things kind of like stem from the things like leverage, for example, is I would say is like an extension of yield because like you need to sort of pay for leverage. And like basically, if you can support all these things, you can like have this relatively unified financial ecosystem. And it's like, I wouldn't say it's sandboxed, but it's like kind of sandboxed where like everything uses the same backend infrastructure. Like the reason why Solana works today, in many ways is because like you have a number of different applications that share the same backend, like the same Solana backend, and you can like interact with many of the different things using the same underlying like asset state. That I think is like sort of what you want in many ways, but you want to like design the underlying infrastructure with this in mind, like no credible neutrality. Like how can you say like we think that blockchains are good for like asset transfer, exchange, origination, and yield, right? Like if we think those are the main things that you want to do on a blockchain, what are the right infrastructure features you need for this? And I think that comes down to things like opinionated sequencing, for example, is like one example of something you'd want if these are the baseline applications you want to support.
Yeah, can you just like break down opinionated sequencing? I know you guys have, what is it, like maker cancels are prioritized, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, maker cancels are prioritized and like Oracle updates are prioritized. Those are the primary ones that we want to focus on to start. There are a few other ideas that we can like start implementing in the future too. One idea that I've had recently is like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the term cron, but really it's just like a scheduled job where like, it's called cron. Cron is like this, it's like a way to schedule like jobs on an interval. Like say I want this script to run once every day, at midnight every single day. You can like define this configuration file and say like, oh, I'm going to like have this particular piece of code run at this time every single day consistently. I think with Atlas, like this becomes like a very reasonable thing to start building in. Someone tried to build this in Solana a few years back. It was called Clockwork. I think it's a pretty interesting idea. But I think it makes more sense to do like just on the underlying sequencer level. Like one example here is like, say I have like this, I have this loan and I want to like auto roll the loan. You can say that like when the loan reaches maturity, you automatically just roll over to the next into the next like expiration. That's like another example of something you can do with opinionated sequencing. But like the main ones are like cancels and oracles, and I'm happy to go into both of those. Yeah.
Well, okay. We can talk about that. I also wanted to ask you, Hyperliquid launched and has been incredibly successful, and they first launched as a very opinionated, I mean, in this context, I think we would describe it as opinionated perp DEX, right? And there's like clearly product market fit for perp DEX. They then launched the Hyper VM, right? Is it Hype VM or Hyper VM? Whatever. They launched
Hyper VM.
Yeah. Okay. So they launched their own chain, right? I've asked other people this, and I think I'm not an engineer, so I often I defer to people who are. And how much conflict does it create when you optimize a chain for one single purpose, right? Something like a perp DEX first and foremost, and then you start allowing this integration and potentially a more open validator set. Now we saw with that recent, short on Jelly or whatever it was on Jelly, like maybe these validator sets are like quite easy to come to consensus on big decisions. I don't know if that's exactly consensus, but maybe change the rules a bit for big decisions. But I'm curious, how like what problems, if there are problems, I don't know if this is the right word, but like what problems exist when you optimize for one single use case and then all of a sudden you're letting potentially new validators in, and then ultimately new applications and projects being launched on another chain, right? And that's what it is, right? It's the entire own chain.
I think the only thing that you really kind of lose on that you should be like a little bit concerned about is like if your like bandwidth gets saturated. Then that becomes kind of a problem, because like if you're like looking for this one use case and suddenly a bunch of like block space demand comes for this other use case, like does it actually cause like is there like a negative externality on the primary use case? I think that's like the main thing that's like scary about adding like generalized stuff to the chain. And I think one way that you can think about opinionated sequencing in general is that like you're kind of just like reserving bandwidth for certain applications. So like you're saying that like in the worst case scenario, like you still guarantee that these like really important critical things are still like working properly. And so yeah, I mean, I think like with extending something like Hyperliquid to being this general like VM, it's not crazy. I think like the thing that you have to the thing that you have to balance, and the trade-off's like pretty non-trivial, is like how can you like prioritize what is the most important stuff, and can you make sure that your bandwidth doesn't get saturated to the point where like you're just doing too much at once? Because ultimately, like a blockchain is running all these operations on the same computer. I've said this before online, which is like your computer can do a lot. Like computers are really, really fast. And you're able to like the amount of bandwidth, like I say bandwidth, it's like kind of like really it's like,
yeah, I know what you
like
mean.
some amount of work. There's some amount of work you can do, right? Like I have like some unit of time and I can do like this much work. Like how can I allocate that work properly to do different things? Like a pretty non-trivial problem, but like computers are so fast that you can just do so much work all at once. And like if that gets saturated, that's when you actually start running into problems, and you have to sort of prioritize. Like CPU scheduling has been this problem in like operating systems for like probably over 40 years at this point. And like people like the reason why like in the MacBook Pro works really well, or like any laptop you're using works pretty well, is because like the CPU scheduler is pretty smart, and like you're using like a single piece of hardware to do all this stuff at once. It's like really impressive when you think about it. I think like with blockchains, it's kind of like it's a similar problem. It's like scoped down by quite a lot, where like you have basically only like these financial applications. Some of them are going to be pretty heavy on the bandwidth side. I'd say like trading is like one that is like probably pretty heavy, because you have a lot of operations that are being done, largely like places and cancels, and a lot of things are like very light, like loan origination. I think is like super light, right? Like if you were to look at like everyone who's like closing a mortgage in the US for like a year, like that easily fits on a single computer, like no questions asked. And so yeah, I think it comes down to like when you make your opinionated chain, like when you enable like these like sort of generic things to be built on top of it, it just comes down to whether we think like you have enough like bandwidth to occupy all that stuff. And then the opinionated stuff is just reserved bandwidth. Like what are the things that we toss aside for the things that we think are important, and how much additional stuff do we have left to do other miscellaneous work?
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember talking to Eugene right before on one of the podcasts he came on, and I asked him like, okay, in 10 years, where are we? And I think one thing he said was, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it was something to the extent of equities, like stock market is on chain. It's like quite ambitious. I love the ambition, but I'm curious, how close does, and I don't know, you can go anywhere you want with this question. How close does Atlas get to traditional finance? You can, like we were talking about Binance before, and you know Solana still ticks at 400 milliseconds, which is comparatively slow. You can go wherever you want, but like how close are we in your mind with something like Atlas to TradFi?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think that like my answer is you have to see it in prod. I think nothing really matters until it's production. But also like I think one of the theories behind this is that like you can actually do quite a lot of stuff like on a single machine, right? Like that's what I was just talking about before, and I still believe it. You can do quite a lot of stuff on a single machine, and like one thing that like kind of has to be seen is like how can you push the limits to that? Like one of the reasons why I think Solana is cool, and one of the reasons why like I think the underlying ethos for like the Solana developers is like sort of resonated, is like they're kind of like the whole like I don't know, increased bandwidth, reduced latency thing is kind of along the lines like, oh, like what can we actually like make this thing as fast as possible? Can we make this thing as like as high throughput as possible? I think that like the intuition behind that is like, yeah, the computers are really fast, so like maybe you actually can. Maybe you can put a lot of stuff. I am not like confident that you can put like literally everything, like literally all trading on a single blockchain. Like you might increase the capacity of a single computer. Like it's like physics, right? Like it's possible that it's like not enough, but I think you can do quite a lot. And like I want to see how much that is. And like if you hit the limit, like what do you do in normal like tech is like you shard, right? Like not everything is a shard.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Right. So I think like one way that you can view this is like, okay, so like Atlas, like we think that it's like generally good infrastructure for like financial applications. Maybe it supports like 20 order books, maybe it supports 100 order books. I don't really know what the number is. Like that limit is like something that is like still very TBD because I don't know, like without the production mode, I don't have a good estimate of like what the capacity of the chain looks like. But you have some number of things it can support, and like after some point, it's like, oh, like we've hit the limitations of the physical computer, and so you have to figure out how to scale it further. And like I don't think sharding is a crazy idea because like that's what you do in like traditional tech. It's like if you have like the CME, for example, like I don't know how it works like entirely in the hood, but I assume that like every market it has, like it's probably not on the same computer for every single market. Like you might have separate servers per market, and that's like a pretty reasonable way to design your system. And like you're probably not at capacity for everything. And like one like kind of cool thing that you can do with something like Atlas is you can say like we try to like cluster together these things that like that are like maybe not super active, and like maybe you can actually reach capacity. Like you reach close to capacity on the single computer with like these markets, and like maybe certain markets are like extremely intensive from like a compute perspective, and those might need to get sharded out, and that's not crazy. And so I think we have a pretty practical approach to this, which is like I certainly don't believe that you can put everything on one computer. I think you can put a lot on one computer, and like I want to see what those limits are, and then once you start hitting those limits, then you figure out like what is the right way to partition out the state, because ultimately being able to like interact with state A and state B always all the time, it's kind of this like neat party trick that isn't always that useful, because not all state really needs to like there doesn't need to be this use case where like every piece of state needs to interact with every piece of state all the time, like atomically. That's kind of like this thing that like blockchains let you do, but that's a trade-off that like I think many people would happily be willing to give up if it means that you can like have a more functional system. And so like my view of this is that like you should be able to do quite a lot, but maybe not infinite.
Yeah. What was the rationale behind launching Atlas as, again, an L2, however you want to describe it, but functionally it has a connection with Ethereum? What was the rationale there versus, we've seen probably 5 new L1s either launch this year or are going to launch in like the near future? Like why in your mind did you like sort of, go with this L2 design? Maybe the single sequencer plays into it, right?
Yeah, I think that plays a lot into it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So it's a good question. I mean, I think the single sequencer plays a lot into it, which is like, one, it's like, it's done that we know that works. And like, we think that just general, like HFT on an L1 is like this fundamentally like difficult problem to solve. It's like, at the very least, untested. Like there's like no known approach that actually works well. Like we know that the Solana approach is like we know that it's broken in some ways. We know that there's like fundamental flaws with that. I don't know if MCP fixes it. Like in theory, maybe it does. I don't like theory. I like things that are in production that you can like actually understand. I'm very confident that like single sequencer like clearly solves this problem. And like the thing that you get for this is basically like the verifiability. I think is like a nice aspect. That's like the crypto component. Like I think that being able to sort of replay and rebuild the entire state and like verify that the transitions are valid is like a very, very nice property to have. And like Ethereum, like I don't really care. Like I don't really care what the base layer is. I'd settle to Bitcoin if it was possible.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, let's say that Solana can't in the near future, say 5-10 years. Maybe that's not near future in crypto, but let's say that Solana can't support all trading on one blockchain. I've always thought that Solana makes a lot of sense for stable coins. Like, and I don't want to like pick a side here, but I think that one unified ledger, just again, this comes not at all from an engineering background. This just comes from my own intuition, which, you can grade how you want, right? But I have thought that a single unified ledger for stable coins makes a ton of sense, right? And first, compare this to something like all these L2s and these weird different security trust assumptions you take on with USDC on base versus USDC on Arbitrum versus USDC on, whatever other L2. There are differences, right? And there are like functionally sometimes what appears to be kind of intractable problems with creating like interop or, however you want to describe some of the problems with like, these are not truly deep down fungible assets. So that makes sense a lot for me on Solana. It's like, oh, this could be a great platform for stablecoins. Do you see in your mind, like, okay, maybe we don't put the CME and NASDAQ on chain, but it could end up being like quite useful for stablecoins? Is that a good outcome? Or like, one, is that likely? And two, is that a good outcome?
Is it likely? I don't really have a good gauge for this. Honestly, like I don't have a good sense of like, I don't have a really good pulse on like, what payments are going to look like in 5-10 years. So yeah, I don't know if it's likely or not. I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you with confidence. Like I think for sure it's going to happen or it's not. I think it's a great idea. And I think like it's clearly a success story for Solana. Like I think for Solana, what they want is they just want chain usage. They want this network to be economically valuable. If like the network is used for stablecoin transfers, I think that like it is clearly economically valuable.
Yeah. Maybe I'm being a little bit reductive there because like I'll go back to the analogy you use, which is like all mortgages in the United States could be like you could interface with every single mortgage in the United States and have it on a single computer. So maybe I'm like, creating like a very small, use case. There's a lot of other financial applications, right, that could exist on Solana. I'm just pointing out like perhaps the NASDAQ on chain is like quite ambitious. And as you said, it's not really proven, right, in practice. And I'm just more saying like maybe Solana ends up being very useful for Pump.Fun and even like Camino and these other applications that do have use cases, right? And then stable coins, like I said, that to me seems quite intuitive that it's decentralized enough, right? And USDC self-custodied is decentralized enough. It's not like Bitcoin, right? Like, but it's a completely different construct. And yeah, so I was just pointing out, like, maybe I'm being a little bit like, oh, just stable coin. Like the only thing that Solana could be useful is stable coins. I'm not saying that. I'm just, it could end up that, yeah, HFT doesn't happen on Solana, but there's other like, things that can be contained on a smaller computer.
Totally. I think that makes a ton of sense. And like, honestly, I think it's a good outcome. Like the outcome that you want, like the outcome for any of these networks is like, is this network useful for something? I think like Solana was like looking for this use case for a while. In like 2021, it was like NFTs, like, oh, Solana's NFT chain. I remember like, I thought it was kind of a pivot from like, we're going to be on-chain NASDAQ to like, you have this like Dutch tulip craze for NFTs on Solana where like, you're just clicking apes on that of Eden, right? Like, I think it's like very different from what it is like today, right? Where like, if you remember back to a few years ago, the only activity on chain for Solana was people just buying these pictures. And like, I think people were like, oh, this is like the future. And then it turns out that like, once the price goes down 50%, no one cares about these pictures anymore. Which is like expected. I think it's like very logical, rational behavior. But, I think at the time, a lot of people didn't have that insight. It's like everyone looks at the world through like rose colored glasses when it's a bull market, right? You have to like ape into everything. I think, like I was saying, like Solana thought in 2021 and 2022 that this was like what the chain was being used for. I don't think it's crazy. I think like I would be happy, like if I was like sort of rooting for like Solana success forever, I would be happy for any use case. And it makes sense to like chase the thing that seems to have product market fit at the time, which was NFTs. In this recent cycle, it was like Memecoins, like Pump.Fun really took off, and it seemed like you actually like started sticking with retail. I think about Pump.Fun had a lot to do with it. I think Phantom had a lot to do with it too. Like the mobile experience of trading on Solana has gotten so much better compared to like the last cycle. And I think that like that actually affects things quite a lot because like basically you have this entirely new consumer base that is like mobile first and not like web first. I imagine that like really changes the game quite a lot, where if you can punt on like Whiffcoin or like, I don't know, Jelly on your phone, that actually fundamentally changes the game, like from a UX perspective and also from like an outreach perspective. But yeah, like, I mean, like ultimately these networks are looking for a use case, whether it's meme coins, whether it's NFTs, whether it's like stablecoin transfers. If there's a use case that sticks and has PMF, I think that the network itself is like quite healthy and happy, like as a result of being able to like have some economic value in the real world. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's ridiculous to say that meme coins maybe they're going to go through like huge peaks and troughs, but it's not unreasonable to think that this is sustainable in some capacity, right? I think most people would agree with that. I do have one question. It's like totally adjacent, but I'm just kind of curious on your opinion. a lot of discussion recently has been about this REV, right? And how like Solana is crushing it with REV. What do you think of this? Just like this general premise of REV.
So this is kind of embarrassing, but like I know what MEV stands for. What does REV stand for?
Now you're putting me on the spot. It's fees plus
tips. Is it just revenue?
Right? Yeah,
is it just revenue?
No, it's it is just revenue but it just subtracts inflation. So it's real economic value.
Real economic value.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sorry. You don't have to answer this question if you don't want. Well, maybe I'll phrase this slightly differently. So we're going to have to figure out what this acronym means together on the podcast. What do you think about the long run validators? What is the equilibrium that validators make in the long run? And I guess this is a bit of a loaded question, right? Because I see these REV numbers and they are absolutely blown up because people are willing to get sandwiched for 20 and 30 and 40% on some Telegram bot, right? And like this is a big part of these MEV plus tips, right? This is not a stable equilibrium. Like I don't think any of us are going to sit here and say outside of Memecoins, any real financial actor is going to trade in a market like this. So then I come to sort of the next step, which is, okay, what does this look like in the long run, right? Like applications capture more value, you're not getting sandwiched. There's like, what do you think in terms of, like long run value for blockchains? Is it from this, like, MEV plus tips? Obviously you guys have gone a different direction, but I'm just curious on your opinion.
So there's like the value for the application, and I'm assuming REV only corresponds to values that are like sent back to the validator. Like, how do the validators like sustain their revenue, sustain their business by running a node? And currently on Solana, I think like the primary way to do it is via like this inflationary reward. I think there's this like this 228 SIMD that was widely debated, basically trying to reduce the emissions and try to make the attempt is to make the network a little bit more sustainable, like from a revenue perspective, without having inflation being like the driving factor to run a validator, which I don't think is a crazy idea in theory. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough problem because like if it's the case that like so much of this REV is derived from sandwiching, that's like this like it's fundamentally this like broken market mechanic that's leading to this number being so high. It's not like the users are like actually like very, very happy to pay this value. It's like they're actually just getting like basically getting like stolen from, largely due to the fact that they're like setting their parameters incorrectly. But like in an ideal world, it's like just a market order, right? Like if I'm market ordering for this thing, like it's not like I don't want to pay 50% slippage, dude. Like I want to get the best price, and then like I get sandwiched in the middle. It's like a pretty bad outcome for like literally everyone. But that does contribute to this REV number being higher. Right. So yeah, I'm trying to think like what this actually ends up looking like. Like say you are all sandwiching, and like now it's like you like cut this number by some percentage. I don't know like how large it is. Ultimately, like you have this like fixed operational cost, which is like running this node itself. Like you need to pay for the hardware. You need to like rent the servers, and you have to like vote with Sol. So that's like another piece, right? So you have some like OpEx related to like running this node and keeping it online, and you have this like some like revenue that comes from a combination of block rewards and a combination of like inflation. And ultimately, you need those block rewards to be higher. And I think in the equilibrium, what probably has to happen is that the users just need to pay a little bit more fee, like to the block, right?
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
Yeah, it seems like I guess my like base case is that REV as a percentage of just validator take rate has to come down. Like there is no doubt in my mind that like this is not stable, right? And a lot of times these booms, Pump.fun and NFTs, like whatever it may be, they really distort these numbers. And then you can kind of point to this as being like, well, look at this, incredible activity. And the reality, and to be fair to Ethereum, like they've dealt with this by, pushing a lot of execution off to L2s. So that's one very clear example, but they have been working on this for a long time in the sense that, trying to minimize the amount that comes from sort of this, predatory behavior. So I don't know. I definitely think it comes down as a percentage of rewards. Like, I think it's very naive to think that like you're making some like very, very high returns off of this MEV number,
Yeah. I guess like one way that you can sort of like model blockchains or like model something like Solana is like, it's kind of just like this big casino where like people are just trying to like pull the slot machine, right? Like every single time you pull the slot machine, you like, you're paying a little bit back to the network in some way. Some of it goes to the applications, some of it goes to the validators. And like, ultimately the thing that keeps the REV number high is like how many people are pulling the slot machine. If like 10 times more people are pulling the slot machine, it's possible that you can kind of sustain these like crazy numbers for a long time. Yeah. But I think people get bored. Like it's not like
for sure.
Like I don't think like meme coins are fundamentally that fun, right? Like I think it's like fun for the first time, or I think that the first time someone like buys a meme coin and like they get like an outsized return, that's a very like that's like the product joy that you get from using the blockchain.
It's also really bad if you it's really, really bad if you walk into a casino and hit a $500,000 jackpot because now you're like convinced that like the long run is, winning like this. I think a lot of people saw that, right? Like early on in the meme coin craze, it was like, oh, you can buy all these, stupid AI agents and you're getting 100Xs and then the money gets raked off the table, right? Like, and we saw this, how predatory it became. And it's like very clear, right? Like the casinos, the one last point I would make on this though, which is like kind of ironic and why it would be really interesting to observe is that I bring this analogy up. I mean, with sports betting, like most lines are 10%. Like you are paying 10% rake. That's very high relative to casino games, which are like somewhere between 0.5 and let's call it like 5% on the high end. But people sports bet an insane amount in the United States, right? And most of the time they're paying effectively 10% juice with almost no, like very infrequently do they get like rake back or whatever. So my only point is like, on one hand, I'm like, this is obviously not the future of finance. And it's very clear that no real financial actors are going to, like work in a system where they could be sandwiched for 10, 50%, whatever. But on the other hand, if there is some like long-term sustainability with meme coins, who knows? People will pay a high rate. So I don't know. It's kind of an interesting like paradox.
Yeah, no, I actually totally agree with that analysis. And I think like one thing that's like kind of interesting is like, if this whole thing is to design like good casino games, like it makes sense to like sort of understand like how to model like the actual EV of each individual like user making a trade, and like what is a reasonable amount that they like make or like lose every single time. Yeah, and like I think that like if your lose rate with like aping into meme coins like 90% of the time you're going to lose money, and 10% of the time you're going to like 2x. It's like probably not good enough. Like it's probably not. And it's definitely not good enough for the user to be like, I want to like keep pulling the slot machine.
Right.
Like I think the reward function is just not like, it's not properly calibrated if you want to make like this on-chain thing a good casino. And I don't think enough people have like really thought about the economics here.
No, for sure. Because also when you go, I mean, not very few people do this obviously, but like if you go into casino, you could theoretically map out your, expected. Like you could map out your EV, right? Like if you go play blackjack for 1,000 hands, right? Like the expected value of like your losses, right? And so there is in casino, and also this is all like highly regulated, so like they can only rake X amount or whatever, right? So yeah, it is interesting. And I tend to agree. It's actually it's a fun casino, but it in many ways is much more insidious. And you're right. If you're only 2xing, if you're only 4xing, like obviously that's not going to account for the 9 times that you lose 100%. Okay. I had one last question. We kind of got like sidetracked, but it was good. It was interesting. I wanted to ask you, like with this new model that you guys are going with, like this very purpose-built, I'm really shilling that well, purpose-built, like single sequencer. I want to ask, why do you think it took so long? And maybe some people still disagree with this, but why do you think it took so long for crypto to kind of come to some of these realizations in terms of the best way to build a trading system is to have like some of these like very opinionated decisions? And I'm alluding a little bit to that universal API tweet where you said, like to me, it's a plugin for, a massive database for financial assets, right? Conversely, a lot of people have had these visions of AMMs and like these decentralized trading systems. And it definitely seems for right now, people are moving in the direction that Atlas is moving in, I would say. Why do you think that this took, I don't know, 5-10 years?
People are very like idealistic and people are very tribal. I think it's like the main answer to this, right? Like, and also like this stuff isn't obvious. Like, I think a lot of the intuitions you get from like working in TradFi, like they don't teach it in schools. You just kind of have to like, it's kind of like what I said, like, oh, like MCP, like this idea is like cool in theory. I want to see it in production before I have like any real understanding. Cause like all these things in theory kind of fall apart when you like start to see them live. And then you can like look at the data and you understand like whether the thing works or not. And I think like a lot of times it's hard to do that. And it's very easy to get like sort of locked in, like getting tunnel vision is like super easy. Like, we have to do it this way. We have to make it super, super decentralized because of X, Y, or Z reason. And like you basically have this like optimization problem where you like want to turn the knobs in the right way. And I think like one thing in crypto is that like one thing that's kind of nice is that you should be able to like change your priors and like adapt and move quickly because like the landscape is so dynamic. But I think you have these like lessons that you like, the incorrect lessons you learn, and it just takes time to sort of like naturally evolve into what seems to be a better thin solution. I think Uniswap is a really interesting example here, where like I think that people thought like in the start that it was like some financial alchemy. I think still like super innovative product, like really, really cool. The fact that you can actually like do something like Uniswap in like on Ethereum, I think it's like very, very, very impressive. But there's obvious properties that like any trader coming from TradFi would immediately notice. Like, yeah, maybe if you like put your passive liquidity in the pool, it's like it's not going to make you money forever. Like it's just like not how
that was one of those things that existed. Okay, I don't know exact timelines, but like this was something that was not very studied. In fact, Eugene was one of the people who kind of like got this conversation going, right? I mean, it took 2 or 3 years for people to start thinking about, wait a second, like I'm just basically providing stale bids in perpetuity. Yeah, you know. Exactly. So I'm just like, yeah. Go ahead.
Like, I don't know why that took so long. Like that, I think, like that should be like intuitively obvious, but like it took a long time. I think largely to do like tunnel vision, more than anything. And like, it's like a combination of tunnel vision and like this like idealistic worldview. And like, I think you want to be practical with it. Like crypto is this universal API for money. Which really just means that like the back end is kind of like this back end abstraction of like having this ability to like move your assets around with like cryptographic wallets is like a really neat thing. It's like really cool. It unlocks quite a lot of stuff. And I think you want to like innovate around the things that like this feature set unlocks and try to like ignore all of this noise, because there's like a bunch of noise in the industry. It's really easy to get tunnel vision. It's really easy to get locked into this like ideology without thinking about like practical implications. Like I think ultimately like there's this like tendency to like over idealize. There's this tendency to like theorize and not ship. And I think ultimately the thing that you want to do is like kind of lean away from those natural tendencies, just because of like the fact is like crypto in general like has not really found product market fit outside of this like gambling component. And if you want to build a system using this backend that like can serve like real financial assets, you have to like look at the problem pragmatically.
Well, that was quite an inspiring conclusion. I really appreciate you coming on. I thought it was great. Good luck. I'm very excited to see what you can, what Atlas becomes. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. It's JRXIAO. Same on Telegram. Happy to chat anytime. Thanks for having me on, Gwart.
And also they are hiring elite engineers, by the way, too. Always looking for elite engineers.
That's true.
We can't leave that part out. All right. Thank you so much, Jarry. I thought it was great.
Thanks, Gwart.